Hello and welcome to my Flame Golem Elementalist build. Now you'll notice normally with Golem builds, you'll see that they use generally a variety of golems where they have one main golem and a bunch of supporting golems via the jewel Primordial Harmony. The idea is pretty simple. You use a couple of your golems to get a bunch of % damage because this says for every type of golem you get, the golems get more damage. So like if you have 5 golem types, every single one of these primordial harmonies, and there is no limit, just the limit of how many you can fit in your tree, gives you about 100% increased damage, which you can stack a bunch of those, and that's usually a pretty good way to get % damage. Now I am challenging this idea and going pure flame golems with a bit of a different setup that I'd like to showcase today, and that is using Dissolution with Blood Barrier for life scaling, then getting Flame Link to give our golems a lot of flat damage, and then using Necromantic Aegis in combination with the Rathpith globe. All of these things combined together to give my character a decent defensive layer, 20,000 life with Blood Barrier, which adds another 6k rechargeable barrier, which I'll go over, and 2, give some pretty massive damage scaling without having to fit in a bunch of extra golems that are there essentially just to make Primordial Harmony good, and then you force Primordial Harmony everywhere on the tree. So how does this setup break down? Well, it starts out with Dissolution and Blood Barrier. I'm going to go over Blood Barrier because it's a bit of a new thing. Blood Barrier is via the Ultimatum Ascendancy, Corruption's Embrace, the part that says you have Sacrifice of Blood if 8 corrupted items are equipped. And these are not flasks, these are not jewels, they don't count graphs. It has to be 8 items from the 10 slots you have over in your equipment section. Now, that's a pretty big downside, but I'm going to go over why it's not actually that bad to hit. But for right now, what does it do? It says if you have 8 corrupted items, when you are considered on full life, you will regenerate a blood barrier, which makes enemies have to hit through that before they can get to your life pool. And what it does is this regeneration matches your current regeneration and applies it to this defensive layer. So for example, right now I have 6,000 blood barrier, and if an enemy were to hit me and they do 2,000 damage, it would go down to 4,000, and then whatever my regen is, which for my character is about 2,800, that would zoom that HP back up to 6k. Now the fun part about this is that the blood barrier works surprisingly well with Dissolution. Dissolution is normally something that can kind of feel quite bad to play because you get chip damage where you just get gradually ticked every now and then, and you don't get a 2-second window where you can heal up, and it just kind of feels a bit rough. This is why I've steered clear of Dissolution builds more recently as they added T17s, more chip damage, more ways where you get chipped down. I haven't been wanting to play this as much, but I have to say Blood Barrier feels very good in eliminating one of those large frustrations with Dissolution because it gets you a layer of defense that recovers when it gets hit, and then if you get chipped down past it, if you're still considered on full life, it then regens in front of it, and those hits as they hit the blood barrier don't count as hitting your life pool, and then that 2-second window is much easier to overcome where your life just bumps to being unreserved, and it can feel quite good considering Dissolution is a huge multiplier in HP. It's quite powerful when you're using it with things like Flame Link and the Rathpith globe to help out the minions damage. Now, what is the Rathpith globe doing here with Necromantic Aegis? So it's a bit confusing. I know Rathpith says 100 player maximum life, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, what would that do for a golem? The golem isn't a player. How it actually works is the shield checks your life, the player's life, and then grants a stat based on that. So for example, we have 20,000 life. The line that says 5% spell crit, 5% spell damage, that's actually just saying 1,000% spell crit chance, 1,000% spell damage, and that's what we're handing to the golems. That's how the golems can have so much % damage scaling without leaning into an egregious amount of primordial harmonies, as well as it gives us a pretty easy way to fix their crit. We have gloves with 3.5 base crit added to the golems, so it makes it so their crit is nearly capped from just this shield alone, which feels pretty nice considering you can add a bit of crit multi onto the golems. If we added Assassin's Mark in with a third crit, with a third third curse, that would then get us pretty handily to crit cap, although right now I think we're pretty much about there. I think the golems are like 95 crit or something like that. So That is one of the concepts for scaling these golems and how we can have 18 flame golems and not have to diversify into 5 different golem types and not have to spend every single jewel socket on primordial harmony. We're doing a lot of other things that have just nice quality of life, like bound for life scaling, rational doctrine for conk ground. I have a glorious vanity here. I was going to click the divine flush with my next point, which is going to give us half diversion to chaos, which can feel a bit better defensively, get a lot of life scaling here, and that's kind of what's going on. Now, another thing we're doing is you'll notice we have 18 golems. How did we get to that number without primordial chain? Well, we're using the new Foulborn wand, Midnight Bargain, which changes the node, which would normally say, I think, +1 Spectre and reserve 30% of your life, and the double Foulborn one says, instead of the reserve life, you'll have a downside that makes you lose life based on the amount of minions you have out, and it gives you +2 golems, which +2 is a lot of golems. Between this thing, we get +2. The normal is 1, that takes you to 4. Our Ascendancy gives +2, that takes us to 6. The node on the tree takes us to, I believe, 7. And then Golem of Hordes gives another +2, which takes us to 9. And then the Dark Monarch doubles that. I might have mixed something up there. We also have the Anima Stone for +1. I think I miscounted somewhere, but you get the idea. Long story short is, instead of 14 golems, this thing allows us to get to 18 golems, which is like roughly a 30% more damage because you have, 30% more golems, something like that is the rough idea. And the lose downside, where it says lose life per second, doesn't feel all that bad when you're playing a dissolution build where it doesn't matter for your overall sustain whether or not you're losing life per second. It only matters that you have enough net sustain that you out recover that lose life per second. For example, right now, I am losing technically 9% of my life per second, but my regen amount is 2,800. So 9% of 20k is about 1,800, which means we still have another 700 plus net sustain, which brings us to our next point, which is Flame Link. Flame Link has a big cost per second. It is 38 life per second times 18. So there's another 700 cost there, which is why we needed to get to this amount of sustain. You just need just enough to be above your cost of your Flame Link and the cost of the wand. You could go a rare wand here. Ultimately, this thing's really cheap, and a rare wand will probably be fairly comparable damage-wise, but not 100%, if that makes sense. Another thing I want to state is Primordial Chain. You could take this all the way to 24 golems. I don't think that's a very good choice because Primordial Chain has a very large downside, which is 25% less golem damage. So you could add 6 golems, get 30% more damage, so to speak, in output because you have 6 extra golems, but the 25% less damage will just nullify that damage gain entirely, and then it attaches less life onto the golems, which makes them squishier, more likely to die, which is a problem. Additional golems also means you have to flame link to more things, which is also a problem, and you have the opportunity cost of giving up a nice amulet slot with life, +1, some attributes, stuff like that. So that is why we did not go for Primordial Chain. Now to follow this up, let's talk about getting the 8 corrupted items. How do we do it? I think it's easier than that might be perceivable. You might think 8 corrupted items, that sounds pretty expensive. Well, most of the items are fairly cheap in that regard because there is a ton of Calm's Hearts on trade that are already corrupted. You don't necessarily need percent life. Percent life costs a premium for a good roll. You could just get a 4% roll if you wanted, or just no percent roll at all, and you'd be spending 10C for a corrupted calms. So your first point there, pretty easy to do. Foulborn Midnights are not very expensive, so you can easily get some of those corrupted. That works very well. Keep in mind, whenever you're valuing something, it's a 25% chance at a brick and a 75% chance for a non-brick. 25% chance to change socket color, 25% chance for no change, 25% chance to change the implicit. Those are kind of the breakdowns of what can happen when you val an item. So Foulborn, Midnight Bargain, not all that expensive. Rathpith, not all that expensive. There are a lot of corrupted double golem helmets on trade, not all that expensive. Where it gets more costly is your 4 rare items, where you have to expect you're going to have to remake 1 or 2 of them on average. But the good news is they're not all that expensive to make. For the boots, I would recommend going for Cannot Poison plus Chaos Res plus Life Regen. You could be a little bit more subtle on this and say you forget the Chaos Res and then you just have a bit of a hole in your defense where you're a bit squishier to Chaos Res. That sort of thing could be an option. But the way I went about it was recombinating, where you get boots that have non-native modifiers. What I mean by that is you take a pair of boots that has int, T1 chaos res, faster recharge or recharge rate, and then you get a pair of boots that has life regenerate and cannot poison, and you slam those together, and if it chooses the strength base, the recharge rate and the int can't occur, and therefore you are much more likely to get back all three of the suffixes you want. Afterwards, doing a bristle matron and a veiled chaos to get movement speed, block something, slam, craft life, and then slam a Val Orb after you've done the implicits. That's the sort of the idea for the boots. For the amulet, you can simply just buy an amulet that has life and +1 fire on it, and then do previous game change, veiled chaos. One thing I'll add here is you want to add Elder Influence if you want a 15% life bound. If you don't want the 15% life bound, you can just use a regular amulet and not worry about adding the Elder Influence. But typically, I think it's worth it. 15% life on one jewel that cost about 50 chaos for a max roll is usually a pretty good investment, in my opinion. Once you do that, you'll unveil attributes or +1 min endurance, block a mod, slam, craft another stat. For myself, I ended up with Chaos Dot Multi, completely useless to the character. Hopefully you get something like Res, but ultimately, that's just what you're going for. A little bit of an amulet with some life, a plus level, and some attributes on it, helping you fix your dex requirement for greater volley, and helping you fix your int to be just lower than your strength, because I do recommend going for Rational Doctrine for Conk Ground. That's going to be one of the more premium items in the character. These are about 6 divines right now on trade. It helps get you permanent Conk Ground, and the other thing it does is whenever you recall your golems with Convocation, they get the Conk Ground effect. You can kind of see the glowing effect coming off of them. That, I believe, is them being affected by the Conk Ground, because Conk Ground lingers when you have this for 4 seconds. So I believe it gives it more regen for the golems. I think that's how that works. So the idea for the golems is they have sustain from Rational Doctrine. We have 2 primordial bonds giving some regen, and then we have 1 feasting fiends cluster. Their golem sustain, you need the regen, and then you need this leech node. Before I had this leech node, I was able to do some uber synth bosses, but occasionally they would spend their life down. You have to remember, you've given them the Rathpith, which has 10% life sacrifice on spell cost. So the problem I was running into is I didn't have quite enough regen for the golems. So once I got this Feasting Fiends and they started to leech, their sustain was fine. So you're going to need 1 cluster with Feasting Fiends, and Renewal's a decent node as well. This 3 stat I think is about like 50C on trade for these 2 you want on the travel node. And the third notable doesn't matter as long as these are on the travel node. Next up for crafting, we have the belt. This is getting an Elder Belt and doing pristine fossils. I know you're wondering, Lance, why is there Warlord influence? Originally, I was planning to do a more expensive setup of the character, but I decided to say, you know what, screw that. It doesn't really add a lot of power, and we can make this character a lot cheaper. And the reason I was thinking is I was going to go for 6 Warlord items where I had basically a double influence Rathpith, double influence Comms. I was going to spend all this extra money to get a +1 on bound, but it really wasn't going to make the character all that much stronger. Plus levels will make your golems tankier, which will help nullify some of the downsides when you do more rippy content with higher fizz damage. However, their damage doesn't change all that much, in my opinion, because we're giving so much flat damage via Flame Link. So gem levels, although you can force more, like you can force another +1 on the amulet, you could force another +1 through bound and a bunch of double influence. It's a very expensive but small upgrade. So originally, I had made this for that plan, but I scrapped that plan to present a much cheaper setup for the character. Another thing is, so you pristine fossil this, you're just going for life plus flat life. Ultimately, if Elder Stygian Vises aren't too expensive on trade, because Elder Exalts are very cheap, you could consider just recomming this. Ultimately, that'd be the best way to do it. Do a few Reforged Lives, get yourself T1%, get yourself T1 flat, slam a few belts together until you hit. You're just looking for those prefixes with some Fertile Catalyst, and then you're going to YOLO slam the Val Orb. You could consider before doing the Val Orb or before starting the craft, you can do a Gilded Fossil that adds item cells for a vendor. In case you randomly Val an implicit, it would give you 50% chance to not remove your Abyssal Socket. That's the idea there. All right, so that goes over the boots, the amulet, and the belt. These all should be more on the cheaper side of crafts to do. So the idea is you're going to expect to craft from these 4 items, maybe 2 of them you'll have to craft twice. If you get really unlucky with Val Orbs, it could be a bit more, but that's the sort of idea you're going for. Cheaper crafts, you'll have to corrupt a few, but the end result with Blood Barrier feels really good with Dissolution, in my opinion. Last but not least is the gloves. These do not need to have Warlord influence. This was something I was planning to force in, the double bound with the +1 with the 6 Warlord items, but I scrapped that idea. This amulet this craft is quite straightforward. You have a Shaper base, you use Essence of Horror, which gives the 3.5 base crit mod, then you annul every other mod off there, or every other suffix, I should say. Do suffix can be changed, and scour. This will give you a magic base with the 3.5 base crit. Then you will do a Bristle Matron on that magic base, which will give you suffix can be changed. So you should have a magic base with 3.5 base crit and suffix can be changed. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to imprint. And the process is very simple. Every time you imprint, you will then go to Regal, you will do Reforge Caster, and it's going to hit crit multi or faster casting. What I would recommend is do this imprint Regal step until you have crit multi T1 with 3.5 base crit. The reason I say that is the difference in the T1 crit multi, which is 70 crit multi, versus T3 is 30 crit multi, is a very big difference. Whereas the faster casting at level 16 versus level 20 is a 4% cast speed difference, which means if you hit level 16, no big deal, you're happy. And the reason I'm saying that is because the final step of hitting these suffixes is you just do another suffix can be changed, Reforge Caster, and you're guaranteed to force on cast speed, because the only 2 caster mods you can hit on a Shaper pair of gloves is crit multi and faster casting. So once you got the crit multi on there, then you know you're only going to spend 2 divines to suffix can be changed, Reforge Caster, you're going to force on the cast speed, then you're going to do a Bristle Matron. You could do a Reforge Life or a Veiled Chaos, block, unveil, block, slam, craft life, slam, Valor. That's pretty much the process for crafting these gloves. These will probably be the most expensive item to craft out of all these gear pieces, but you should only have to do it for probably 5 to 10 imprints plus a couple suffixes can't be changed. That's the sort of idea there. That'll be your most costly item to craft, but it should still be relatively reasonable to go for. Okay, now after all of that, the final item in the build you want to look for is a cluster with attack and cast speed and 35 effect. Now you'll notice I bought one with 3 all attributes. There was a cheap one and 2 divines for this fracture because it's a non-perfect fracture. Ultimately, what you need here is the attack and cast speed plus the effect, which you can do with Reforge Casters, or maybe there's some cheap ones on trade. You don't need 12 passives. I would be happy to trade these nodes for more life on my tree, as well as you could go for 2 more notables, similar to like this cluster here. The idea is pretty much that we are trying to get a little bit of my attributes fixed. If you had better attributes on your rings, for example, you wouldn't need this. It's pretty much just making sure I can get enough dex for greater volley, and I can get enough int to get some chaos res tattoos to help fix my chaos res. That's pretty much the idea we're going for here. Ultimately, I'd probably recommend splurging a bit more on your rings so you didn't need attributes over here. The rings I got here were very cheap. I think they were like 10 and 40C each. I just have rings with decent flat life. Ultimately, you could go for, let's say, Vermilion rings with percent life, with hybrid attribute crafts like a more normal ring. I just bought some cheap mirrored rings off trade. That's the idea we're going for. Okay, hopefully I've covered most of what the character is doing. Now I'll give you guys a quick showcase of what the character looks like mapping. I got a T17 Fortress to showcase with some mods and like gain damages extra, pen, and a few things. The biggest thing I would say about this character, what it can excel at, is it does bossing pretty well. And then for mapping, it feels pretty cool in terms of just running around and doing whatever you want. But, however, there are specific map mods that are a bit too punishing for the golems right now. I'll give you an example. Gain Fizz's Chaos right now for the golems is pretty rippy. I convert 40% of the enemy's damage to elemental whenever I ignite them, and the golems are immune to elemental damage, so they're pretty tanky in a lot of cases. But for example, I gotta stop saying for example, I have not invested in chaos res on the golems. This is something where you could put points into chaos res for the golems, and all of a sudden that wouldn't be so rippy. But right now it's just a hole I have in this budget setup, is I do not have chaos res on these guys. So gain Fizz's Chaos is pretty rippy, whereas running this map, which has well, I guess it doesn't have gain is extra. Well, anyways, gain is extra elemental wouldn't matter for the golems per se. It would just be a bit more rippy for us as the player, but we're not really in too much danger as we kind of just can do whatever we want. and the golems do all the actual work. You know, they're out there in the fields putting in the work, and we're just kind of like chilling on the sidelines while they fight the enemy, right? We don't end up in too much danger, so to speak, if that makes sense. Another thing I should mention for Flame Link, we have invested into the +1 mastery, so that way it always targets 2. It'll auto target the golems that don't have the link yet, so you don't need to worry about like, oh, is it really annoying to figure out which golems to give the buff to. It's pretty much just your mouse is in the general vicinity, you're not really even thinking about it too much, and just occasionally throughout the map you're doing like this sort of thing, like where you're just arbitrarily pressing the button. And on top of that, this thing lasts for almost 23 seconds, so you don't really have to think about it too much. It's just kind of as you're running through the map, whenever they port to you, you'll click it once and you'll just keep on moving. It's pretty smooth QL. I know a lot of people get a visceral reaction whenever you hear the word link skill. I can't say I'm all that different, but when it comes to a character like this where there's just we don't have to do much, we're just kind of running around anyways, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Like, I'm playing a build where I'm kind of just picking up loot for the most part and walking around. It's not that big of a deal to occasionally press the link button. Another thing is convocation. If you do see your golems doing something stupid, like let's say they run into a Cirrus Cloud while you're doing Awakener, this is what convocation is for. It's for forcing them off of like some degen ground that's going to brick their ability to sustain, something like that. Or if you just want to force them to port you to the next like fight of enemies you ran into, that's that sort of thing. Also, it forces them to walk on conk ground very briefly when you're on conk ground, which gives them the 4% regen, so that's good. And on top of that, let's just say you want to make sure you're linking up your boys. It forces them on the screen, so that way you actually can link to them. Like if they're partially behind you, you're not going to link to them. But for the most part, the game has a very aggressive system of porting them to you. If they're off screen, they're going to pretty much port to you like very soon, if that makes sense. Anywho, that is, I think, all the details of the character. I really liked this character, actually. It took me back to one of my fondest memories of the game, which is the first time I killed Shaper. I was a really big noob at the time, and the way I killed Shaper is I went in there, sucked at dodging the mechanics, I died, and the golems back, whatever patch this was, I don't know, Legacy League, way back whenever I started the game, the golems, they could do damage to the boss after you were dead. So they would just finish the fight. They would keep fighting Shaper. They wouldn't die. They'd finish the phase. I'd revive, go back. I'd walk to the next phase. And that was the first time I'd beaten Shaper. Super cheesy, but it was a fond memory nonetheless. And I got to be honest, I quite enjoyed playing this character with the Cheese Puff boys, just laying down the siege on the enemies. We're, of course, going to keep working at doing some more builds because there's not a lot of time until next PoE2 League. I really didn't think it was going to be this soon, and there's a lot of builds I want to make. So the next thing I'm going to try to make is I'm going to try to finish up the Glad setup that I want to do for the Blood Notch setup, and then after that, I actually have been thinking about doing an Archmage cast on crit with the new sword. I want to try to make Archmage cast on crit work. So we'll see how that goes. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one.